This right here is the most important 3-week stretch in Raptors history since the championship run. They have 3 doors to choose from. One is good, one is fine, and one is wrong. And let's pray they learned a lesson from 2023 and don't choose the wrong door again.
We get into the playoffs, and anything can happen when we get in the playoffs, as we've seen. So,
playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs. You kidding me?
A young core aching for meaningful playoff experience, serviceable bets, and a budding star taking a leap against the backdrop of a draft that's absolutely worth tanking outright for.
Be a man, do the right thing.
But since the Raptors were named after Jurassic Park, I can think of no better line to sum up the decision that Masai Ujiri has to make this month.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
This is going to be an awesome video. We're going to learn a lot about the Toronto Raptors team building philosophy. Please hit like and subscribe on your way in. We're trying to get to 20,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Can we at least get to 12? Let's do it. Yo, what's up? If that was choppy as hell, I am definitely re-uploading this, but let's talk about the Toronto Raptors decision. And we're going to talk about 3 pathways, 3 blueprints that the Toronto Raptors can go with. And there's a lot at stake. Okay. There is a lot at stake for the Toronto Raptors right now. They can pretty much determine the next 5 to 7 years of their championship window, building around Scotty Barnes, all the emergence of Grady Dick, Jonathan Mobo. Everything that's going right for this team can be either accentuated or you can just pour a bunch of shit all over it right now. And I think that it is important to realize that it's not tank or bust, that there are different doors. So we're going to look at some nuanced pathways that the Toronto Raptors can take. This is going to be one of the best lives in our channel's history. I'm going to guarantee it right now because this is the overarching biggest conversation in Raptors land. And by the end of this video, you are going to have a much more informed perspective on what the next 3 to 4 weeks of Toronto Raptors history will mean, especially when we look back on it 10, 15 years from now. So let's talk about door number 1. Now, we're going to look at the Orlando Magic, largely because I think that the Orlando Magic have done a lot of good things over the last 4 or 5 years that the Toronto Raptors can frankly learn from. And in 2021, they drafted Jalen Suggs and Franz Wagner. We didn't know it at the time. Some of us were high on Franz, some of us were low on Jalen, but Jalen Suggs struggled and the Orlando Magic were not very good. And they ended up winning 22 games that season. They pretty much tanked. Suggs had a bunch of injuries. And ultimately, it came down to, well, we need one more piece. And that's where a lot of Raptor fans are right now. They feel like you need that one more piece, okay? And that one piece would inevitably come via the form of the first overall pick in the 2022 draft, in which the Orlando Magic had really one pressing question: Chet Holmgren, Paolo Banchero, or Jabari Smith. And up until 2 days before the draft, it was going to be Jabari Smith, in which case probably you're looking at this entire decision to tank very differently. Much like the Toronto Raptors, the Orlando Magic were in a situation where they had 3 doors. 2 were good, 1 was not. I was pushing for the one that was not, so egg on my face. But the Orlando Magic were smarter than me that day. They chose Paolo Banchero, and the rest is history. The Magic have gone on to become one of the most dominant defensive teams in the league, surrounded by a bunch of budding young players that are taking a step every single year. And I think if you ask an average Orlando Magic fan, it started with the decision to draft Franz, Jalen Suggs, and Paolo Banchero in back-to-back drafts, i.e. tanking and getting really high in the draft and getting that high-level talent that you simply are less likely to find later in the draft. So where have the Orlando Magic gone since then? Well, frankly, they have become a dominant powerhouse in the Eastern Conference this year, followed up the drafting of Paolo Banchero with a 33-win season. Then they inevitably take another step last year, getting to the first round, pushing the Cleveland Cavaliers, who are another dominant story that the Raptors could learn from, up until Game 7. They build on that experience with head coach Jamal Mosley, build a culture of accountability, defense, and then inevitably this year, despite losing Paolo Banchero for a significant amount of time, Franz has taken another step forward. Jalen Suggs has taken another step forward, and frankly, the Orlando Magic look pretty scary. And if you're the Toronto Raptors, you really should be focused on teams like Orlando and teams like Boston and teams like Cleveland in terms of how they've done it. All of them have done it with multiple, years drafting at the top of the draft, because these are the teams that you'll inevitably have to compete against when you want to compete for championships. So door number one was tanking for Paolo, and that's something that the Raptors could learn from by tanking for a top 5 pick this year. That would be pretty much it, right? Bottom out, trade your vets. It started really with the decision to trade Nikola Vucevic. A deeply unpopular decision in Orlando Magic land, but it led them to Paolo, it led them to Franz, it led them to Jalen Suggs, and I think most Orlando Magic fans are really happy with that. But some people actually have this opinion that it wasn't really the year of tanking for Paolo that really showed what the Magic were about and, predicted and maybe even created some of the success they're enjoying today. It was actually the year after drafting Paolo. Now, you will remember something very interesting. The Orlando Magic walked into December 7th, 2022. This is the year that Paolo had been drafted. They walked in as a 5-20 team. The Toronto Raptors are currently 5-15. So if they lose their next 5, they're band for band exactly the same. The Magic were 5-20. They were one of the worst teams in the NBA. And then something really miraculous and weird happened. They had just come off of a 9-game losing streak in which they had just finished losing to the Toronto Raptors with Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam. Then they lost to the Milwaukee Bucks. Then they took on the Los Angeles Clippers in Orlando and beat them. And if you're wondering, yes, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George played that game. And it was shocking, and it was in overtime, and everyone couldn't stop clowning the Clippers for losing to the worst team in basketball. Little did they know that for the next 22 days, the Orlando Magic were going to become the hottest team in basketball. They not only beat the Clippers, they then proceeded to beat the Atlanta Hawks. They beat the Toronto Raptors twice. Again, Pascal, OG, Scotty, Fred, they played all those games. People could not stop talking shit about the Clippers and the Raptors for losing to this terrible team. And then they took their 4-game win streak into Boston and beat the Celtics in their own building. Not once, but twice in convincing fashion. They closed out pretty much the stretch leading into Christmas by losing against Atlanta, beating Houston, and then beating San Antonio. Ultimately, they went 8-1 despite starting out 5-20. They ended the season with 33 wins. So they kind of fell off after the year, after the New Year stretch. But that little glimmer of hope, that beating the Boston Celtics, beating the Toronto Raptors, beating, beating some pretty good teams during that stretch, beating the LA Clippers, this gave them a snapshot of what this team could be. And then they pulled the plug. Now, they pulled the plug and they decided to do this in the 2022-2023 season, which meant that the consequence for doing this meant they were pretty much pulling themselves out of the Victor Wembanyama sweepstakes. And there might be some Orlando Magic fans that would say, were those 8 wins really worth it? Because we ended up with Anthony Black. Well, you ended up with Anthony Black, and at the time you believed in Anthony Black. You certainly could have chosen Derek Lively, might have helped a little bit more. You could have chosen Casey Wallace. You could have chosen Grady Dick. There's a lot of different ways you could have gone with this draft pick, but inevitably you picked 6th in a draft, which was really top heavy. And guys like Brandon Miller might have helped a lot more than Anthony Black. Guys like Scoot Henderson, in theory, at the time at least, would have helped more. And Victor Wembanyama would have changed the entire trajectory. And maybe Victor Wembanyama guarantees championships in Orlando. Are you kidding me? One of the 3 best defensive teams in the league getting the, future 10-time defensive player of the year. The Orlando Magic decided to try to be competitive in a year where tanking was highly incentivized, but they believed in that young core. They believed that what they saw in that stretch showed them that this was a core worth battling with and worth going to bat for, and ultimately not worth tanking with. And so that was really door number 2. And that's something that the Raptors can probably accomplish over the next 15 games. Okay. This is door number 3. This is the door that the Toronto Raptors themselves took in 2022-2023. And it is the worst door, and it is the wrong door, and the Raptors should not do it again. I hope the Raptors have learned from the past, because as that old saying goes, those who don't learn from the past tend to repeat their mistakes. The Toronto Raptors in 2022, 2023 were 23 and 30. 23 and 30 on February 1st, if I'm not mistaken. They were one of the 6 or 7 worst teams in the league. And some of us, including yours truly, were pushing, pleading, begging. I did everything short of getting on the streets and starting a hunger strike because it was kind of cold and getting on the streets might have been dangerous for my health. Pleading with the Raptors to please tank. You don't have enough. Fred is absolutely walking in free agency. It's not worth it. But no, the Toronto Raptors were 23 and 30, and then they proceeded to win 3 games. 3 games in a row. 3 games against not so great competition, including the San Antonio Spurs. And after moving themselves up to 26 and 30, the Toronto Raptors sold themselves on the idea that getting Jakob Poeltl to pair with Scotty, who was struggling, Fred, who was leaving, and Pascal, who was growing disgruntled with his contract situation and being in trade rumors, and OG, similar situation as Pascal, that adding Jakob Poeltl to this would solidify the hypothesis that this team was just one center away from being very good. Were they very good? Well, they beat up on a lot of really bad teams, and they lost to a lot of really good teams. If you go back and really study that stretch with Jakob Poeltl, who did they really beat? I want to know. They beat the Charlotte Hornets twice. The Charlotte Hornets were awful. They beat the Milwaukee Bucks at the last game of the season. The Milwaukee Bucks rested all their starters. So that's another fake win. And you added up all those fake wins and you inevitably ended up at the play-in. Okay. You beat the Detroit Pistons. You beat a lot of really bad teams. You beat the Memphis Grizzlies. Congratulations. They didn't play John Morant. They didn't play Steven Adams. They didn't play a lot of players. And again, you can rack up these wins against what is today the Washingtons and the Detroits, but they don't mean a hell of a lot in terms of understanding who your team is. These are not the wins that you want to know at the end of the year cost you Cooper Flag. The wins you want to have cost you Cooper Flag might be those valuable wins that the Orlando Magic racked up in door number 2. Wins like at Boston, where your young team really tests itself against really good competition. Those are the doors. That's the door that the Raptors should pursue. But this door number 3, is very possible for the Raptors as well. And I think in order to understand that, we have to really understand what is coming up for the Raptors this month. And I don't think that before we get to what the Raptors are about to do and who's on their roster and what they should do inevitably at the end of this video, when we'll talk about that, I think we need to talk about really what the true cost of that decision was, because I think that it is a gift that just does not stop taking. Okay. So everyone talks about what it really cost the Raptors, right? Which is that dreaded first round pick that hung over our heads all last year, which inevitably conveyed into, it conveyed to San Antonio. San Antonio traded it off for multiple firsts, in the future. And who knows what those picks will turn into. But inevitably that pick turned into Rob Dillingham. It could have been used on, I don't know, a franchise level point guard of the future like Nikola Topic, who slid down draft boards. It could have potentially been used on the possible rookie of the year, Jared McCain. It could have possibly been used on Zach Edey, who would have shored up some of your center issues. It could have been used to trade. It's an asset you just lost and you don't have it back. That's the one thing people talk about. What's the one thing people don't talk about? Well, the Toronto Raptors needed a center. You know who was at the top of the draft and totally available and really fits with Scotty a lot better than Jakob Poeltl? Derek Lively. Scotty needs a vertical lob threat so badly and a guy who can potentially space the floor and defend the rim. And Derek Lively is probably as good, if not a better player right now than Jakob Poeltl. Y'all may not believe me on that one, but it's true. And you basically did a 1-for-1 swap by refusing to tank. You also missed a chance at potentially pairing Scotty with a generational talent like Victor Wembanyama, even if the odds were never going to be better than 15% or 14%. Yo, you were right there. You were tied with the Portland Trailblazers, who ended up, by the way, tanking and getting the number 3 pick. And okay, maybe they're not super happy with Scoot Henderson, but I think you'd be happier right now with Scoot Henderson than Jakob Poeltl. So that's one part of it that people do talk about. Those are two elements of it that people talk about. Okay. And we're all very, very happy with Grady Dick. And don't get me wrong, Grady is awesome. He's not Victor Wembanyama. So that's the part that people talk about. You know what the part people don't talk about enough, and they should? Those 2 second-round picks that got traded. There's one player that I think should be untouchable on Portland's roster right now, and I don't think it's Scoot Henderson or Shaden Sharp. I think it's Toumani Camara. And Toumani Camara is interesting because he is the type of draft prospect that the Raptors really prioritize. Toumani Camara might be like the most Raptors-y prospect ever. He's everything that Vision 6-9 entails. And Toumani Camara was a second-round pick in 2023. You know what the Raptors didn't have in 2023 because of the Jakob Poeltl trade? A second-round pick. You know who was available on the board when the Raptors would have picked with that second-round pick? Gigi Jackson and Toumani Camara. Both players who, honestly, I think you might trade right now, Jakob Poeltl 1-for-1. So, you know, we talk a lot about this Davion Mitchell trade in which the Raptors got back 3 assets who themselves are worth more than Davion Mitchell. Well, I think the Raptors traded 2 assets at least. We don't know about the third yet because it's still yet to convey for Jakob Poeltl that in and of themselves would be worth more than Jakob Poeltl. I would trade Jakob Poeltl for Toumani Camara right now. I would trade Jakob Poeltl for Gigi Jackson, and I certainly would have traded Jakob Poeltl for the 8th overall pick in this year's draft. So I think we're getting to the point where, you know, at least we're starting to understand the true cost of that disastrous trade, one of the worst trades in Raptors history, if it were not for the Vince Carter trade. You know what else people don't talk about? The fact that because Jakob Poeltl came on the roster and because you started winning, Fred was allowed to sort of save his season, which means you lost your all-star point guard to the Houston Rockets because the Houston Rockets were able to sell their fan base on the numbers that he put up, largely spamming pick and roll with Jakob Poeltl. You gave him the cheat code to boost his stats. Congratulations. And oh, by the way, all that loyalty, not trading him at the deadline, the conjunction, the point, the loyalty to Fred is what led you to Jakob Poeltl. The loyalty to Fred is what led you to not trade him for Grayson Allen and a first-round pick. Anyone? Yeah, I would love Grayson Allen and a first-round pick for Fred VanVleet. I wish we could build a time machine and do that over. So instead of trading Fred VanVleet for Grayson Allen and a first-round pick, you ended up trading for Jakob Poeltl. And I know that some of you out there are just like, Rob, leave it alone. We got a center. You've got a center on your roster who doesn't have a lot of natural synergy with your best player, who doesn't shoot and is a very competent player, but is regressing fast on defense and is kind of overpaid. And you could say he's fairly paid by NBA values, but really he's just barely fairly paid. Okay. So this is the reality. Okay. This is a reality check for anybody who's living in fantasy land. That's a trade that was horrible for the Raptors. And oh, bonus, you lose Fred VanVleet. And oh, bonus, because you lose Fred VanVleet, the San Antonio Spurs are like, we'll offer Jakob Poeltl money to come back. And so the Spurs kind of screw you. After robbing you blind, they then become the competing offer for Jakob Poeltl. And oh, there's no state income tax in San Antonio. So now, because the Spurs are offering $13 to $14 million for Jakob Poeltl to come back, you have to overpay. I think it was like a $12 million deal. So in order to compete with that $12 million deal with the Spurs, you now have to overpay him and pay him 19.5, and you have to give him an extra year. So now you're locked into Jakob Poeltl north of 30. Congratulations, a center who can't shoot. Cool. That's the real cost of 2023. Don't do that again, Toronto Raptors. Now let's talk about what the Raptors have ahead of them this month, because it is a truly important month. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to make myself a little bit smaller, and give this video a like if you're enjoying the pacing. I promise to be a better content creator, and this is my first video towards that end. Okay, you have Miami, you have Indiana, you have OKC, Dallas, New York, Brooklyn, Houston. That is a 7-game homestand spanning 19 days. Then you go out on the road to New York before the Christmas break. Then after Christmas break, you have a trip to Memphis, return home to Atlanta, and then you have the joy, the pleasure, and the misery of going to Boston for New Year's Eve. This is not an easy stretch of games for a team that is already 5-15, but there are some interesting things that you need to know about this stretch of games. Number 1, there are no back-to-backs. Number 2, 8 of the 11 games are on your home turf, which is important. Number three, every one of these teams is going to be favored to beat you, regardless of who you get back. Every single one of these games, you will go in as an underdog. Actually, I have a nice little trivia question for you. Answer later on, or answer in the chat if you're watching this later, let me know. How many games of the Raptors' 20 games so far do you think Vegas had favored the Raptors to win? Please let me know, because they've won 5. How many were they favored to win? Let me know. Okay. So obviously it starts tonight against Miami. This is a gettable game. You need to get it. Indiana. Jordan T saying 4 and 7. I'm going to say a good 3. Liam saying 1. If I'm not mistaken, this is the correct answer. I don't remember the last time the Raptors were favored to win. I could be wrong. I don't check Vegas odds every single day, but I'm pretty sure they were either favored to. I don't think they were favored to beat Charlotte. They were 3.5 point road dogs against the Detroit Pistons without Cade Cunningham. So, yes, I think they were favored to beat the Pelicans. Were they favored to beat the Pelicans? It might have been 1 or 2. Okay, I'll check later and I'll let you know in the chat, who was right. But the point here is that the Raptors have a winnable game tonight against Miami. It becomes almost must-win territory because you are 5 and 15, and the math on 5 and 15 is pretty simple, that if you end up a really disastrous stretch here, you don't get to choose whether or not your season is going to get torn down. It also depends, unfortunately, for the Raptors, that the East start to get a little bit better. The Philadelphia 76ers just picked up their 4th win. Can they start making a bit of a climb? That's going to complicate things a little bit for the Raptors. Will Joel Embiid be shut down for the season? The Sixers don't necessarily control their own pick unless it's bottom 5. So, the Sixers have to make a decision themselves. But ultimately, teams like Atlanta, Detroit, Brooklyn, etc., are all above you. Every single team that you're facing here is above you in the standings. Every single one. And some of them are way above you in the standings. And a team that you might be sleeping on, which is December 22nd against Houston, if you're not really an active observer of NBA basketball, that team is one of the 3 best teams in the West right now. So this is not an easy stretch of games by any stretch of the imagination. If you had to pick 4 wins in this group, it's probably Miami, Indiana, Brooklyn, and Atlanta. Those are your 4 wins. If you can do anything more than 4 and 7 over this stretch, I think you have positive signs. But if you do go 4 and 7, I think the solution will be simple. Pull the plug. If you go 5 and 6, now we're getting in dicey territory. Did you win that game against OKC? Did you win that game against Dallas? Did you win at New York? I mean, one of those games, you have to show some sort of life here. I think it's also worth considering that during this stretch, the Raptors will be reintegrating 3 key members of their core rotation. Number 1 will be Emmanuel Quickley, probably mid-December. You can expect him to be around Brooklyn. I think there's another game that's just missing from this schedule. There's no way the Raptors have a 10-day gap in the schedule. I think that's the in-season tournament. Not sure about that yet, but whoever they will play during that stretch, we will update that naturally, but we're just talking about these sort of non-play-in tournament games. And that's just where we are right now. 4 and 7 means you are 9 and 22. 9 and 22 is not great. And perhaps that is more disastrous if the teams around you have started to really accelerate. Now, if teams around you start to tear down, if teams like Brooklyn are in full tank mode and Atlanta starts to tank by the time you get there, well, then I'm not necessarily counting those wins towards your aggregate total, and I don't really care if that's an encouraging side. The truth is that the Toronto Raptors can potentially get 6 wins in this group, but it would be really difficult. Anything north of 6, I think, becomes very encouraging. Or maybe the Toronto Raptors really want to go after the Orlando Magic blueprint from 22-23 and really just ramp up and, I don't know, beat Miami, beat Indiana, beat OKC, get close against Dallas, beat New York, beat Brooklyn, beat Houston, and then now suddenly you're like 6-1 over a 7-game stretch, at which point the Toronto Raptors will be forced to probably just shift focus because the tank will be dead at that point, right? So I'm not saying the Raptor season is over. I'm just saying after this month, it will be clearer where you are. And anything short of 6 and 5 or 5 and 6 should be an automatic pull it. Like, just pull it. If you go 8 and 3 over this stretch, 3 and 8 over this stretch, it's over. Okay. It's absolutely over. It's too late and you don't have enough talent. Okay. Now, I think that it's also worth noting that it's not hopeless. Okay. There's a lot of really good things happening for the Toronto Raptors right now. Scotty Barnes is back, and the Raptors are 3-6 with Scotty, but they could easily be 5-4 or 4-5. That Denver game, a minute to go, they were up 6. Scotty gets hit in the face around the 34-second mark. They score in transition because he doesn't make it back, and then you lose in overtime. You probably win that game if Nikola Jokic doesn't knock his lights out. Boom, now you're 4-5. The Raptors lost the buzzer to the Detroit Pistons. Honestly, they've enjoyed some abysmal performances. They've had a lot of negative lineups, but it's worth saying that the lineup data of RJ plus Jakob plus Scotty is positive. And it's up to you to determine whether Grady and Emmanuel Quickley will make that overwhelmingly positive. We haven't seen enough of that this year. It's also worth considering that with Grady and with Emmanuel Quickley coming back, some defense is going to go to the bench. Right now, you're getting a lot of defense from Ochai Agbaji and Jacoby Walter. And I think there's a way that you could say that there's a lot of talent on this team that you weren't expecting. I'm going to show you some of the talent just to give you a nice little hopeful thing. Just so this is not all bearish. Take a look at this. This is so cool. So thanks to B-Ball Index for doing this. Jonathan Mobo is number 1 among rookies in pickpocket rating, okay, which is awesome. And Jamal Shed is not that far behind, okay? And Jamal Shed and Jonathan Mobo are just the 2 Raptors rookies who've played the most. But I actually think that if Jacoby plays a little bit more, he's going to be pretty high on these boards too. The Raptors genuinely do have 3 or 4 of the best rookies in the NBA this year, and it's pretty cool to see that it's not just that they're getting meaningless minutes and putting up meaningless stats, but actually that they're actually pretty good basketball players. Okay. In terms of defensive playmaking, the rookie leaderboard has Jonathan Mobo number 2, and it has Jamal Shed number 6, which is also pretty cool. Again, these are young players that most people did not have very much expectations for. And in terms of passing lane defense, thanks to B-Ball Index again, Jonathan Mobo is number 1 and Jamal Shed is number 3. And I'll tell you right now, if Jacoby Walter plays a few more minutes, you'll see Jacoby Walter being number 2 or number 6 or number 5. He's awesome at this too. The Raptors have absolutely got a really strong, I would say, reason to pull the plug. First of all, when you pull the plug, fan interest declines, MLSE's pockets get a little bit lighter, ticket sales, get worse. But wouldn't you pay to see Jonathan Mobo play 25 minutes a night? Wouldn't you pay to see Ulrich start? This is not last year. There's no Jamias Ramsey on this team. It's all fun young players, and they're playing a competitive style of basketball. I have no problem trading Jakob Poeltl. I think the bigger question philosophically here is to tank or not to tank comes down to one really big question. Do you believe that you have enough? Do you believe that you desperately need to add a top 4, top 6 pick to this core? And I'm not saying do you want to, I'm saying do you need to? Does your doing so basically shift the perspective on your next championship? Can you compete for championships with this core? I think there's one big issue with RJ Barrett in the starting lineup, with Jakob Poeltl's decline defensively, and with this incessant need now that you have signed Emmanuel Quickley to the contract that you've signed him to. I don't think you have enough defense on the team. And that was my big issue coming into this season. I had 3 main issues. There's not enough defense in the starting lineup. There's no backup point guard that I would write home about. And I don't think that there's like that backup center that can really play with Kelly Olynyk. And, you lose the guy who could have filled one of those roles in Dennis Schroeder last year. He would have been a great backup point guard, but inevitably he wanted to move on, and we were happy to move on from him. You lose Christian Koloko. So there's a world in which you hang on to Christian Koloko, don't waive him because of medical issues, and you hang on to Dennis Schroeder, and you're competing this year. But maybe you don't want to compete with Dennis Schroeder. Maybe you want to compete with someone younger. So when you look at the starting lineup, it doesn't necessarily fit, because the minute you start to take out things in your starting lineup that are really making it go, like Jacoby Walter and Ochai Agbaji, you now have a catastrophic defense. You don't have, 3 of the guys who have started a lot of games in your injured lineup replacements are actually pretty good defensive upgrades over the players they're replacing, right? Jamal Shed is a pretty good defender. Maybe if Emmanuel Quickley comes back, he's not going to play as much. And now you have to rely on Emmanuel Quickley to rediscover some of that magical defense that he was playing in New York. RJ Barrett, despite a lot of talk during training camp of being a better defender, hasn't really looked like a much better defender. He has moments, he has spurts, but he has been god awful defensively. Jakob Poeltl, despite being billed as, one of the top 10 centers by the Raptors themselves when they traded for him, has not really played like a top 10 center defensively. He's been a top 10 center offensively, no questions asked. But defensively, centers have to do certain things, and there's just a lot to clean up. And when you take Ochai Agbaji out of the lineup, and you take Jacoby Walter out of the lineup, and you replace them with guys like Emmanuel Quickley and Grady Dick, the load on Yak and Scotty just becomes too much. And so, do you want Scotty Barnes carrying 65% of the load on defense because you just have terrible, terrible defenders around him? I think the swing here is Yak and RJ. By some divine miracle, if you have a direct line to God, maybe you can just pray that they become much better defensively. But I think the longer term solution here would be to replace those two positions with significant upgrades defensively. And there are plenty of those types of players in next year's draft. There will naturally be plenty of those players available in the trade market. And because offense tends to be valued more than defense, at least in terms of contractual value, turning Jakob Poeltl and RJ Barrett into mega numbers guys offensively might inevitably create the structure for you to be able to trade one of them for some significant defensive help. Now, I don't know if the Raptors have accepted Jakob Poeltl's decline defensively. Maybe they think he's just waiting to dial it up. Maybe he's possibly, a much better defender than I'm giving him credit for right now, but there's a lot of things he can't do. And the net rating with Yak plus Scotty is slightly negative, and that's not necessarily what you want to see, especially if you are already a little bit trepidatious about the pairing of Scotty Barnes with a center who just clogs up so much space inside. Now, Yak's a good player. Boucher is a serviceable expiring. Davion Mitchell is a serviceable expiring. And I do think that the Raptors' fire sale will start sooner than later, especially if they struggle tonight and against Indiana, because, again, when you really do look at that schedule, hold on, let me just add this up again. When you start to look at that schedule, you start to see that maybe it ends a little bit sooner, because tonight against Miami and December 3rd against Indiana, which is just 2 days away, over the next 3 days, you have 2 of your 3 to 4 most winnable games of the stretch. OKC, Dallas, New York, sure. I mean, what do you say about this team if they lose to Miami, lose to Indiana, and then win against OKC, Dallas, and New York? I don't know. I don't know what you say. I think you say lost opportunity to make up some much needed ground. The Toronto Raptors, in most likely situation, are going to do what the Orlando Magic did indoor. They're going to do some variation of what the Magic did and what they did. And I hope that it's just not too much, because if you look at the Raptors schedule towards like after January, it softens up so much. And at that point, you just really pray that the Toronto Raptors don't have to come out after the 2025 draft, when they inevitably select 11th or 12th after getting bounced in the play-in, and have to say, well, how can you ask an NBA champion to tank? Okay, because that was the excuse given last time, and it's not going to suffice this time. There's a lot at stake with the draft. There's a lot at stake for youth and development, and there's a lot of expiring contracts on this team that I think should be dangled. It's worth noting that the Raptors have pulled the plug many times. They've also not pulled the plug many times. Sometimes it's happy accidents, right? They tried to pull the plug with Rudy Gay. Inevitably, they started with the North, but the Raptors were 6-12 at that point, not 5-15. The Raptors tried to trade Kyle Lowry, and they tried to trade DeMar DeRozan, and they ended up starting with the North. But again, they were 6-12. The Raptors did save their season, or so-called saved their season, in 2023 with the Jakob Poeltl trade, moving off of, contract flexibility, cap flexibility, and multiple picks. But ultimately, did they really save their season, or did they just get embarrassed in the play-in and become the talk of the NBA world for an entire week as a little girl ended their season? I think these are hard lessons that the Raptors have had to learn about overestimating their own talent. It is also worth noting that the Toronto Raptors under Nick Nurse's final year actually underperformed by 4 wins. They were supposed to win 45. They were a top 12 team-ish by the numbers. Maybe you don't focus too much on the numbers, or maybe now you should focus on the numbers, because Jakob Poeltl and Scotty Barnes don't have a positive net rating together. Maybe you focus on the numbers that tell you that your defensive, your starting lineup as currently constructed is very flawed. Maybe you do look at the numbers and say, yes, RJ is putting up a lot of points and a lot of assists, but he's racking up those misses and turnovers like a motherfucker, and he's giving nothing on defense. I think you have to look at this core and just say, when the Raptors win a championship, will Jakob Poeltl be on the team? Should RJ Barrett be on the team? Should Davion Mitchell be getting these extended looks? And if he is getting those extended looks, is it because it's one of those Malachi pump and dump things where you think playing him and talking about his smile is going to net you a decent offer? I think there are probably some teams out there that are leaning very heavily into the analytics of how Davion Mitchell is pressuring the basketball and are seeing some useless piece on their roster that could be converted to an upgrade on Davion Mitchell. Mitchell is certainly not the worst player in the NBA. If I'm the Lakers, I'd probably trade Gabe Vincent for Davion Mitchell in a heartbeat because at least Davion does something on the court. I'd look at Chris Boucher and I'd say, man, aren't there some teams that have some long-term contracts that aren't as productive as Chris Boucher? Certainly. I look at a guy like Bruce Brown and I'm like, can he not be packaged as a part of a larger thing to take back some salary and maybe get a pick in compensation? Certainly. It's unfortunate, though, that the Raptors will inevitably do what they probably always do, isn't it? They're probably going to buy the fake wins as wins. They're going to tell themselves that they've been injured. They're going to give this core a chance because they inevitably like to give this core a chance. But that adjustment period of Emmanuel Quickley coming back, Bruce Brown coming back, Kelly Olynyk coming back, learning their teammates, I think will be just too much. And maybe if I know and you know and every sane person knows that RJ plus Scotty plus IQ plus Grady plus Jakob Poeltl is not enough defense to beat good teams. Maybe the Raptors themselves also know that, and maybe this is the best stealth tank in NBA history. Let's respond to some super chats from Rank Scrub. Do you see Shamshi as a future power forward with Scotty small forward? I could see Ulrich as one of the better backup centers within 3 years. And I do think his value will be at center, not as a power forward. It's not because he can't play power forward, and certainly, in stretches he can with a jumbo lineup. He certainly has flashed a lot of shooting potential. I think what you have with this young core, Jonathan Mobo, Ulrich, Jameson Battle, Jacoby Walter, Grady Dick, like we're talking a lot of good players, okay? Scotty Barnes. There's a lot of really good young talent that really does fit well together. They have a lot of natural synergy. Scotty and Jacoby is a match made in heaven. Scotty and Grady is a match made in heaven. Jacoby and Grady, ironically, are a match made in heaven, even though a lot of people walked into it thinking that they're supposed to compete with each other. Ulrich is a really, really good, at least the theoretical, fully realized version of Ulrich is a really good pairing with Scotty Barnes. He rolls hard, he runs hard, he's constantly pursuing the basketball, and he's a good vertical threat, and he's a good rim protector, so it'll work well defensively with Scotty. I think this is good young players to pair. Let's add 5 more of those in the next couple of drafts, and let's try to make them as good as possible, right? Because there is a seismic gap between Paolo and the 6th pick in that draft, right? Which was Benedict Mathurin. I mean, that's a big gap, okay? So it does sometimes matter. Would you trade Jakob Poeltl and RJ for Zion plus 1 to 2 first-round picks? I don't necessarily think the Pelicans would do that. And I'm not really sure I would do that either. I don't like Zion Williamson at all. I can acknowledge the talent, but he is just cancerous for your locker room. And I don't necessarily want that. I don't want that energy around our young players. I don't want them to look up to that dude. I don't want Scotty deferring to that dude, and he will. So I think no. I think you just go through the process. And no, I don't think that that's the deal that gets it done. I think the deal that gets it done. Tariq saying predict Scotty's stats tonight. Well, I made this clear on the last live that I'm not going to be doing that anymore. I predicted that Scotty was going to have a really huge game against Miami, and a lot of you, unfortunately, bet on Scotty having a triple-double, Scotty going over 25, whatever. And some of you made a lot of money on that. And it's not that I'm not happy for you making money. It's just I don't want to start a very dangerous precedent where I'm giving you, projections or predictions for the future, and you're using that as gambling advice. I don't support sports gambling. One of you DM me and said, hey, I want to give you $100 because that's my cut from $2,000 that I won. Bro, fam, I'm happy for you winning $2,000. You don't got to pay me $100. I don't want to be part of that. I think sports betting has ruined the NBA. I'll say it 500 times until I'm blue in the face. I won't support it. Okay. Could Ulrich hit 7 feet? Most likely done growing. He's 18 years old. He's 18 years old until this month. So I don't think he's done growing at all. Rob, do you think Jacoby should start over RJ when everyone is healthy? It makes a ton of sense. It may make a ton of sense, but this is the NBA. The NBA is political, and there's no chance in hell Jacoby Walter is going to start over RJ Barrett at any point while RJ Barrett is still on this team. RJ is an asset. RJ is, a team leader. Benching him is not going to go well with him. It's certainly not. He's not come off the bench at any point really in his life. The Knicks, I don't think, benched him. He started. Despite struggling in New York, he started. The minute you bench him, you crater his value. I don't think you can bench RJ Barrett. I think you're locked into Emmanuel Quickley. You did that to yourselves by giving him a 5-year extension on a pretty healthy rise. Now, I believe in Emmanuel Quickley, but I am not someone who's going to sit here and tell you he is going to be an overwhelming positive for your defense. I don't think Grady is going to be an overwhelming positive for your defense. So you can't have 2 neutral defenders, a really good defender, another neutral defender, and then a bad defender. That is really just Sahil saying Quickley for Suggs makes sense. Makes sense for you. But you need 2 to tango. And I don't think the Orlando Magic would go for that at all. Jalen Suggs has had a fantastic year. And, I talked a lot of shit about Jalen Suggs in 2021. Didn't want the Raptors to draft him. When he came out as one of the worst players in the league, I victory lapped like a crazy motherfucker. But then just the very next year, I saw the signals turning and I started saying the Raptors should trade Fred VanVleet for Jalen Suggs. Buy low on Suggs. I also said just literally a few weeks ago, buy low on Jabari Smith. He's turning it around. I said buy low on Scoot Henderson 3 weeks ago. He's turning it around. When have I ever steered you wrong, guys? Let me know in the chat. I'll talk to you guys later. I'll see you guys after the game tonight. This is the Miami Heat coming to Toronto. The Raptors, again, don't have a back-to-back this entire month. As per my understanding of the schedule that is on ESPN right now, they don't have a back-to-back this month. What will happen with the in-season tournament games, I have no idea. So the Raptors have plenty of time to get healthy. They'll have plenty of time to practice, which is important when you're integrating all these new players. And they really have 3 to 4 weeks to show Masai Ujiri that this is not a train worth exploding. All right. Okay. I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good one. Please hit like, subscribe. We're really, really close to 12,000 subscribers. Can we get there? I don't know. We'll see. Talk to you guys later. Bye.